The cafeteria went silent the moment the blade came out. 26 men, one exit, and an old man standing alone in the middle of all of it, calm in a way that made the silence feel even heavier. Nobody moved. Because something was wrong, not with the numbers. The numbers were fine. 26 against 1 was not a fight. It was a formality. What was wrong? Him, 72 years old, gray hair, a prison jumpsuit 2 sizes too big, and he hadn't taken a single step back. Victor Briggs, 18 years, the undisputed ruler of this block, raised the blade. Then a door opened, and someone walked in who had no reason to be there. No weapon, no backup, no plan. Just a man who looked at his father standing alone against 26, and made a decision in under 3 seconds. A kind of decision that changes everything. What happened next? Nobody who was there that morning ever fully agreed on the sequence. They only agreed on one thing. The old man was still standing when it was over. Jim smelled like wood and sweat and 40 years of hard mornings. Not the artificial clean of a fitness center. Not the chemical neutrality of a commercial space. This was the real smell. The smell that built up over decades of bare feet on hardwood, and bodies learning what they were capable of. It lived in the walls, in the grain of the floor, in the air itself, which felt slightly thicker than air outside, the way all serious places did. Arthur Dean stood at the center of it. Not performing, not demonstrating. Just standing the way a man stands when he has stopped needing to prove anything to anyone, including himself. Weight distributed. Hands loose. Eyes on the room without appearing to look at anything in particular. 22 police recruits sat on the floor in front of him. Young. Restless in the specific way of people who understood they were supposed to be impressed, but had not yet figured out why. The one in the front row had been trouble since day one. Broad shoulders. Buzz cut. The confidence of someone who had never been genuinely humbled, and had started to mistake that absence for evidence of something. He raised his hand. Sir, a pause. The pause of someone who had rehearsed the question. Have you ever actually lost? Arthur did not answer immediately. He let the question sit between them. Breathed. The restless ones shifted. The one who'd asked started to look like maybe he'd miscalculated. Then Arthur spoke. Just that once. I was 19 years old, Baltimore. An alley behind a convenience store on Remington Avenue. He did not pace while he spoke, did not gesture, did not perform the lesson the way teachers sometimes performed their own material to fill space. 3 men. Nothing was taken. They did not want anything from me except the demonstration that they could, that my body was something they had access to without my permission. The room held its breath. I lay on that ground after they walked away, and I made a decision. He looked at the recruit who had asked, not with anger, with the precision of someone making sure a thing was accurately received. Not to learn how to hurt people. That is not what I decided. I decided to spend whatever time I had left learning to never feel helpless again. Never to be the object in a situation that was happening to me. He turned toward the equipment wall. That is what I am teaching you. Not technique, not force. How to be the person in the room who is never helpless. The gym was still, and then the morning session continued, the way mornings always continued, with the small, ordinary work of learning things that mattered. Hut. The van stopped, the door opened, and the air outside was gray and cold and smelled like exhaust and wet concrete, and the particular nothing of an institutional parking lot. Arthur Dean stepped down, in an orange jumpsuit, 2 sizes too large in the shoulders. His hands were cuffed in front of him. His face was the same face that had been in the gym, calm, unhurried, taking in the new environment with the same attention he'd given every new environment for 53 years. The correctional officer processing his intake barely looked up from the desk. Review period is 68 days from intake, the officer said. First time nonviolent offense, standard track. He stamped something without looking at what he was stamping. Sign here. Arthur signed. I was looking at the building while he signed. Iron Gate Correctional Facility. Gray concrete. Narrow windows placed where they would admit the least possible light. The specific institutional ugliness of a structure designed by someone who understood that an environment communicated things to the people inside it, and had designed accordingly. The inner doors opened. Arthur walked through them. And here is what nobody in that intake room knew. What nobody in that building knew. Not yet. Arthur Dean did not end up at Iron Gate because of a tax filing error. He did not arrive here because of oversight, or the gradual moral erosion that sometimes caught up with men who spent their early decades being righteous. He chose this. Every omission across 3 years of income declarations. Every conversation not had with the accountant who could have resolved it in an afternoon. Every opportunity to avoid exactly this outcome passed over deliberately. Because Marcus was here, Marcus Dean, 34 years old, his only son, 4 years into a 6-year sentence at Irongate for narcotics transportation. Arthur had spent 2 years trying to help from the outside. 2 years of phone calls and legal consultations and letters. And the specific helplessness of watching someone you loved navigate something you could not reach. 2 years of understanding, incrementally, that outside was too far away. So he came inside. The steel doors closed behind him. He did not look back. The cell was 8 feet by 10 feet. Arthur stood in the center of it and turned slowly, not anxiously, the way a person turned in a new space to take accurate measurements. The bunk on the left was already claimed, belongings arranged with the careful disorder of someone trying to project casualness, while actually minding very much where everything was. The man on the lower bunk was watching him from behind a book he was not reading, young, mid-20s. The kind of thinness that came from institutional food eaten without appetite for long enough that the body had revised its expectations. Dark circles under eyes working hard to appear indifferent. Arthur climbed to the upper bunk. Made it. The corners were exact. The blanket pulled to a precise line. The kind of precision that stopped feeling like effort long after it became habit. The young man on the lower bunk watched one corner being folded, then another, with the confused attention of watching a process they didn't understand, but suspected contained important information. "You were military," the young man said. Not a question. An attempt at classification. No. Corrections officer, no. Then why do you make a bed like that? Arthur stepped back from the bunk, checked it. The way a person checked work they cared about. Not for approval, just for accuracy. Because the body remembers even when the mind is looking for reasons to abandon it, he said. And I prefer to give my mind fewer reasons. The young man stared at him. I genuinely don't know what to do with that sentence. You don't have to do anything with it. Arthur sat on the desk chair. What are you reading? The young man looked at the book in his hands as if he'd temporarily forgotten its existence. Nothing. I'm not actually reading. I can see that. What are you doing instead? A pause, longer than the question warranted. Trying to figure out what I am outside of here, the young man said. He said it like a confession he hadn't planned to make. I went in at 23. I'm coming out at 24, which is not a long time. Except apparently it's long enough for something to happen to your sense of yourself. Because I don't. He stopped, looked at the ceiling. I genuinely don't know who I am when there are no walls. Arthur looked at him. That's not a problem, he said. The young man blinked. That's honest. There's a difference between a problem and an honest assessment of where you are. Arthur looked at the small window above the desk. Gray sky, nothing else. Most people your age don't know who they are yet. They just have enough distraction to avoid noticing. The young man was quiet for a moment. I'm Caden, he said. Arthur Dean. How many days do you have? 68 to review. After that depends on outcome. Caden nodded slowly. I have 68 days left on my sentence. He paused. We might be here the same amount of time. That's either a coincidence or sign of something. It's a coincidence, Arthur said. Most things are. Caden almost smiled. Did not quite complete the action, but almost. That night, after the lights went to their dim overnight setting and the corridor sounds settled into their nighttime register, Caden spoke into the dark. Are you scared? Arthur was not asleep. He was not performing sleep either. He was simply still. Fear is information, he said. It tells you a situation requires attention. That's genuinely useful. What isn't useful is treating it as an instruction. Caden was quiet. I'm scared all the time in here, he said, very quietly. I know. How do you? Because you've been in here long enough to learn what to be scared of and not long enough to stop feeling it. That's the worst window. Arthur looked at the ceiling. Pay attention to what the fear is pointing at. Ignore everything else it's trying to tell you. Silence. Will you teach me that? Which part? The part where the fear doesn't run everything. Arthur was quiet for a moment. In the dark, with the corridor light painting its thin geometry on the floor. Yes, he said, starting tomorrow. Block D at Irongate operated on a logic that was invisible until you understood it, and then was impossible to unsee. It was not chaos. That was the first thing Arthur understood. Chaos was unmanageable. What Block D had was structure. A parallel structure that ran beneath the official one, older and more immediately relevant to the people living inside it. Because the official structure managed paperwork, while this one managed survival. The man at the center of that structure was named Victor Briggs, 44 years old, 6'2", 18 years served of a 22-year sentence. He was not physically the largest man in Block D, and he was not the loudest. These were the things people expected from a man who controlled a block, and Victor had learned early that expectations were a resource. You could exceed them. Or you could work in the gap between what people expected and what you actually were. Victor worked in the gap. He dealt in information. Not money, not muscle, not the crude economies of favors and threats, though all of those flowed through his network. Information was the foundation. Who owed what? Who was afraid of which specific thing? Which guards had debts or loneliness or ambitions that made them susceptible to particular arrangements? Which inmates had people on the outside who could be contacted? And which ones had no one? And what each of those conditions meant? 18 years of watching people in a controlled environment. 18 years of learning what people did when they thought no one was paying attention. Which was the truest version of what they did at all. He noticed Arthur Dean on day one. Not because Arthur was impressive, because Arthur was wrong. Something in the way the old man moved didn't compute against the category Arthur clearly belonged to. Elderly, first offense, institutional displacement. The wrongness was subtle. The kind that Victor's 18 years had tuned him to detect even when he couldn't immediately name it. He did not approach Arthur directly. He watched. Reaper, real name Dale Hutchins, 33, Victor's primary logistics person since 4 years back, loyal in the specific way of someone who had run out of better options, brought him a report after 2 days. Tax evasion, 3 dojos in Baltimore, training contract with Baltimore PD going back 15 years, retired last year, no prior record. Reaper set the sheet down. Old man who couldn't keep his books clean. Victor read the sheet. Read it again. Martial arts instructor, he said. Retired for how long? About a year. Victor looked at the sheet, specifically at the line about the Baltimore PD training contract. 15 years of training police officer was not the resume of a man who had let his skills go soft. Skills that went that deep into the body did not retire when the paperwork did. Keep watching him, Victor said. Reaper nodded, started to leave and find out, Victor said, not looking up, if he has any connection to anyone currently housed here. Reaper paused. You think he came in for a reason. I think most people who slum a place are exactly where they intended to be, Victor said. I've been here long enough to know the difference between someone who ended up somewhere and someone who chose it. Reaper left. Victor looked at the sheet for another moment, then set it aside. He had time. 18 years had taught him that patience was the only strategy that worked in a place where everyone else was reactive. He had plenty of time. Meanwhile, Arthur was learning the library. He found it on day 2, before any of the things that would happen later had happened. It was on the 2nd floor, accessed via a staircase that required a pass, which he obtained by asking the intake officer, in the tone of a man making an administrative inquiry rather than a request. Small, under-resourced. Books donated by church groups and community organizations over years of intermittent generosity, which meant the collection was eclectic, in a way that no librarian would have designed intentionally. Philosophy next to romance, next to technical manuals for equipment that no longer existed. A few genuinely excellent texts mixed randomly with titles that had been donated because their previous owners were finished with them in every sense. Arthur walked the shelves without browsing, went to philosophy, scanned the spines, pulled Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. He took it to the corner table. The one with his back to the wall and a clear line of sight to both the entrance and the single window that admitted morning light for about 40 minutes each day, when the sun was at precisely the right angle to make the room look like somewhere else. He opened the book to the middle, started reading. The woman behind the desk watched him for a moment, then went back to her cataloging. Her name was Eleanor Calloway, 58. Silver hair cut short and practical. reading glasses on a chain worn with the absolute absence of vanity of someone who had more pressing things to think about. She had run this library for 21 years. Her husband, Raymond, had been a corrections officer at a facility 2 counties over. He had worked there for 11 years because he believed, with the specific earnestness of people who chose that work, that reaching people was possible, that transformation happened, that the work mattered. Then a man he had helped process for early release killed him in a gas station parking lot 6 months after getting out. Eleanor came to Irongate initially because she needed to understand the thing that had destroyed her life, not to forgive it, not to process it in the therapeutic sense, to look at it, to understand what kind of person he came, what Raymond's killer had been, and whether work Raymond had believed in was real, or was the particular cruelty of a good man's faith being used against him. 21 years later, she was still looking. She had not yet found an answer she trusted. On day 2, she watched an elderly inmate in a too large orange jumpsuit read Marcus Aurelius at the corner table, with the focused attention of someone who was not reading for comfort or escape, but for use. She did not speak to him that day. She noted it. The way she noted things that didn't fit the pattern she'd spent 21 years assembling. And she went back to her cataloging. Victor moved on day 4, not because he was impatient, because the watch period had produced what he needed. Reaper had confirmed no obvious connection to any current Irongate inmate. The man read philosophy and made his bed with geometric precision and had said fewer words in 4 days than most new arrivals said in their first hour, which was itself information. A man who came into a new hostile environment and immediately went quiet was either terrified or calibrating. The terrified ones showed their fear in small ways. The eyes, the shoulders, the way they positioned themselves in rooms. Arthur Dean showed none of it, which meant he was calibrating, which meant he was worth a public interaction. Victor positioned himself near the cafeteria entrance with Reaper and 2 others, not blocking. The way a river current was present, invisible until you were in it. Arthur came in at 7:09. He took a tray, assessed the options with the equanimity of a man who had made peace with mediocre food. Watery scrambled eggs. Toast that had achieved ambitions roughly consistent with being bred at some earlier point. Coffee the color of weak resignation. He took what was offered. Did not make a face, looked for receipt. Victor moved. He did not signal Reaper. He walked over himself, because this was the kind of establishment that mattered, and because he was genuinely curious in a way he rarely was anymore. New, Victor said. Just that, an opening. Arthur stopped. He was holding his tray level. The eggs were not disturbed. Looked at Victor with the unhurried attention of someone receiving information, rather than a confrontation. Yes, Arthur said. You know how things work here. I'm learning. Let me help with that. Victor put one hand on the edge of Arthur's tray, not violently. The gesture of a man establishing that he had access to the physical space around another person. I run this block. That's not a negotiable fact. It's just a fact. Everyone who comes in here has a conversation with me about it. You're having yours now. Arthur looked at the hand on his tray, then at Victor. I have 68 days to review, Arthur said. I have no interest in anyone's arrangements. I won't disrupt what you've built. He paused. I want access to the library and to eat my meals without incident. That is a complete list. Simple, man, increasingly. Something moved in Victor's expression. Not amusement exactly. Recognition. You're not scared, Victor said. I didn't say that. You're acting like it. I'm acting like a man who has assessed the room and made a decision about how he wants to conduct himself in it. Arthur held his tray steady. Those aren't the same thing. Victor studied him. The specific study of someone trying to locate the seam in a surface that appeared seamless. Then he shoved Arthur's tray, hard, with his palm against the side of it. Enough force to send it into Arthur's chest and the contents on the floor, to humiliate and disorient in one move, which was the point. Arthur absorbed the impact. His feet shifted, barely, almost imperceptibly. The weight transfer of someone redirecting force rather than fighting it. The tray tilted, did not fall. His grip adjusted in the fraction of a second between impact and consequence. He was still standing, still holding the tray. The eggs had moved slightly to the left. Victor blinked. He had put genuine force behind that. The kind that moved men his own age without difficulty. Arthur looked at him. And for just a moment, the careful steadiness of his expression shifted. Not to anger, not to aggression, to something colder and more fundamental than either. The look of a man who had made a decision 43 years ago about what he was, and was fully that thing right now. Victor felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt uncertain. He swung, not a telegraphed swing. Victor did not survive 18 years on telegraphed movements. It was fast, coming from his right side, aimed to end the conversation immediately and permanently, and very publicly. Arthur was not where he had been when the swing began. He had moved, minimally, 16 centimeters to the left. The fist went past his ear close enough that he felt the displaced air, and Arthur's right palm was already moving forward, onto the pressure point below Victor's sternum. Not a dramatic blow, precisely placed. Delivered with the accuracy of a man who had practiced this particular technique 10,000 times over 43 years, and knew within a very small margin exactly what it would do. Victor's exhale left him involuntarily. His legs stopped supporting his weight. He went to his knees. The sound he made was not pain. It was system failure. The sound of a body encountering an error it had no response protocol for. The cafeteria. All of it. Stopped. Not dramatically, not the way things stopped in films with a significant musical beat, just stopped. Conversations mid-sentence. Forks between plate and mouth. The ordinary morning noise of several hundred people eating gone. Arthur set his slightly disturbed tray on the nearest table. Walked to the serving line. Asked for a replacement. The server, a small man named Gerald who had been doing this job for 9 years and had seen remarkable things, looked at the tray, at the floor of the cafeteria, at the man in front of him, and gave him a replacement without comment. Arthur found an empty table in the center of the room, sat down, ate his eggs. They were cold. He ate them anyway, because they were what was available, and he had not come here to be comfortable. And in the far corner of the cafeteria, not at Victor's table, not near the groups that formed the visible geography of Block D's social structure, at a smaller table half concealed by a concrete support pillar, a man sat alone in the deliberate isolation of someone who had learned that proximity was a liability. 34 years old, the same long frame as Arthur, the same economy of posture, though age had not yet settled it into the same quality of stillness. He was watching Arthur eat breakfast with an expression that had nothing of a son's relief or pride in it. What it had was the specific terror of someone watch the thing they were most afraid of walk through the door and sit down. Marcus Dean. Arthur saw him across the room, looked at him for one beat, long enough to confirm, not long enough to communicate, then looked back at his eggs. Because some things required privacy that a crowded cafeteria could not provide, and because there was no version of the next conversation that should happen here. With 200 witnesses, and Victor's people already in motion with their recalibration, he ate his breakfast. He did not look at his son again, but he knew exactly where Marcus was as for every second of the meal that followed. The way you always knew where the people who mattered to you were, once you had trained yourself to attention for long enough. Always, they met that afternoon, in the corridor outside the laundry facility, which was the one location in Block D where the camera coverage had a blind spot. Not by accident, Arthur suspected, but by the kind of long-term institutional accommodation that developed when a sufficiently resourceful person had sufficient time to study an environment. He had been waiting 8 minutes when Marcus came around the corner. Marcus stopped. They looked at each other across 12 feet of concrete corridor. The last time Arthur had seen his son in person was the sentencing hearing 4 years ago. Marcus had been thinner then. The thinness of someone who had stopped eating properly months before the trial, in the period of waiting and legal proceedings that Arthur had spent in a sustained fear that he had kept entirely off his face for every moment Marcus could see him. He was less thin now, the body adapting, finding its baseline in an environment that did not change. His face was different in ways that were harder to name. The particular effect of 4 years of managing every interaction as a potential threat. Of learning that you could not afford to be readable. He had learned it thoroughly. "You shouldn't be here," Marcus said. His voice was flat, not angry. Flat in the way of someone who had practiced removing things from their voice until what remained was just the minimal carrier signal of communication. "You've said that," Arthur said, on the phone, in letters, because it keeps being true. It's where you are. That's not a reason. It's mine. Marcus looked at him for a moment, the flatness in his expression doing something complicated underneath. You had a life, 3 dojos, students who needed you, you could have. Cedric is running the dojos, Arthur said. He's doing it better than I was, actually. Lower overhead, better retention in the youth programs. That is not Marcus. Arthur said his son's name the way he had always said it, with the weight of someone who had chosen it carefully. Before the child existed, knowing that the name would need to carry everything he wanted to give. Your mother is gone. The corridor went quiet in a different way. Marcus's face changed, not dramatically. Underneath all that careful flatness, something moved, like weather crossing a landscape that had been still for too long. What, he said, very quietly. 18 months ago. Cardiac event. She was at the kitchen table. Cup of tea. The neighbor found her that morning. Arthur's voice did not waver. He had had 18 months to do the wavering, and he had done it in the places where it didn't cost Marcus anything to witness. She was 66 years old. The doctor said she wouldn't have known. Marcus put his hand flat against the corridor wall, not to steady himself exactly, more like he needed the confirmation of something solid. Nobody told me, he said. The facility sent the notification. It was processed according to their records. The thing in Arthur's jaw moved. I have been trying to understand for 18 months how a man can lose his mother and not receive the information. Marcus looked at the floor. She stopped writing, he said. 8 months ago, I thought. He stopped. I thought she'd finally decided the effort wasn't. She never decided that, Arthur said. That was not a thing she was capable of deciding. Not about you. The space between them in the corridor. 12 feet of air that contained everything that had happened and everything that hadn't. And the specific weight of 4 years of distance being collapsed into an afternoon. Marcus slid down the wall. He sat on the floor of the corridor, not theatrically. His legs simply declined to maintain their function, and he accommodated them. I sat there like someone had removed a structural element that everything else had been resting on. Arthur looked at his son on the floor. Then he sat down next to him. His knees informed him of their perspective on this decision. He ignored them. The concrete was cold in the specific institutional way of surfaces that were never meant to be comfortable. They sat there. 2 men on a corridor floor, 172, 134. The same long bones and the same particular quality of stillness that in one was the result of 53 years of deliberate practice, and in the other was the result of 4 years of survival. After a while, Marcus said, "Why did you really come? I've told you." The real reason. Arthur was quiet. The corridor was empty. Somewhere distant, the sounds of Block D continuing its afternoon. When your mother was dying, Arthur said, she asked me what I regretted. I looked at the wall across from them. I told her the truth. I regretted being better at teaching other people's children than at being present for my own. Marcus said nothing. I cannot fix what I was not, Arthur said. I understand that. I'm not here to fix it. He turned to look at his son. I'm here because you're here. And I was finished being somewhere else while you were here. Marcus looked at the floor between his feet for a long time. Then, very quietly, she would have been furious with you. Profoundly, she would have made you go back. She would have tried. A pause. Something in Marcus's face shifted. Something small. The beginning of a direction chain that would take a long time to click and to complete. Then she would have sit down and eat something, he said. It was her primary conflict resolution strategy. It worked. Every time. Cecily, floor of corridor outside the laundry facility. 2 men who had lost the person who had held them together, finding out if they could hold together without her. The answer was not clear yet, but they were sitting on the same floor. That was the beginning of something. Marcus looked at the opposite wall. Victor's going to come at you again. I know. He can't let what happened in the cafeteria stand. I know that too. He has more resources than you think. It's not just Block D he has. Marcus stopped. Looked at his father. The flatness in his expression doing that complicated thing again underneath. There are things I know about Victor that I haven't. Another stop. It's not just the block. His reach is bigger than what people see. Tell me, Arthur said. Marcus looked at the floor again. Not yet, he said. Not here. Arthur nodded. He did not push. Some things required more than one afternoon on a corridor floor. He understood that. He had been understanding it for 53 years. And that night, after lights out, Arthur lay on his bunk and did the thing he had been doing every night since Denise died. He thought about her, not the end of her, not the kitchen table or the cup of tea or the neighbor finding the door unlocked in the morning. The other parts. The way she argued. With her hands, the way her hands moved when she was making a point. A specific choreography he had spent 41 years of marriage learning to read like a secondary language. The way she laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them, which should have been annoying and somehow never was. The way she had looked at Marcus when he wasn't looking. The specific expression of a woman watching her son and trying to memorize him. He thought about the week he told her he was going to do this. She had listened. She had not argued. She had looked at him for a very long time across the kitchen table. The same kitchen table. The same chairs, the same quality of afternoon light. And then she had said, "You're going to do this no matter what I say." "Yes," he had said. "Then I need you to promise me something. Anything." She had looked at him. "Come back. Whatever happens in there. Come back." He had promised. He was intending to keep it. In the bunk below, Gaydon Brixton was either asleep or pretending to be. His breathing had the slightly too regular quality of someone working at it. Arthur listened to the corridor, to the nighttime sounds of the building, to the specific acoustic landscape of several hundred people in their cells, dreaming or not dreaming, counting or not counting, making peace with wherever they were and how they got there. Day 4 was over. 64 to go. He breathed in, held it, let it go, and started to build the thing he had come here to build. The shower room at 5:50 a.m. held a specific silence. Not the silence of emptiness, the silence of presence trying to pass as emptiness. Arthur registered it before he turned the corner. The way sound absorbed differently when bodies were in a space that should have been hollow. The acoustic difference between an empty room and a room with 3 people in it holding their breath. He turned the corner anyway. 3 of them. Reaper in the center. 2 others flanking him with the coiled stillness of men who had been told to wait and were finding the waiting costly. Arthur walked to the nearest shower head, turned the handle, tested the temperature with the back of his hand. Cold. He left it running and reached for his soap. His back was to all 3 of them. "Morning," he said. Reaper blinked. Twice in 2 encounters now, the old man had responded to the wrong script. Starting to feel like something personal. "Victor wants a word," Reaper said. "Victor knows where the library is." "This isn't that kind of word." The water was warming. Arthur turned to face them, still holding his soap, his right hand loose at his side. He looked at Reaper the way a contractor looked at a job estimate, assessing what was actually there, not what he'd been told to expect. "How many times?" Arthur said. "Have you walked into a room to apply pressure to someone and gotten the result you wanted?" Reaper frowned. "Every time." "Then you've been working with a very narrow sample." The water behind him was warm now, steam beginning to rise. "Tell Victor I'll be in the library at 2 o'clock. That's where I have conversations." The man on Reaper's left moved. He was big. The architecture of someone who has spent years in this building with nothing to do, except lift weight and accumulate grievance. He reached for Arthur's arm with the confidence of someone who had done this before and found it reliable. What happened was not what he expected. Arthur's hand came up, not to block. Blocking was force meeting force, which favored the larger person. His hand redirected, a small arc that sent the reaching arm sideways, using the man's own momentum as the primary mechanism. The man stumbled forward into the tile wall, not hard enough to injure, hard enough to make the point. The second man swung from the right. Arthur ducked, less cleanly than he would have at 50. His left knee registered its opinion of the sudden angle change. He absorbed the information and moved anyway, driving his elbow upward into the man's midsection. Not full force. Enough. The man doubled and sat down on the wet floor with the expressions of someone reassessing their morning. Reaper had not moved. He was looking at his 2 associates, then at Arthur, then back, processing the gap between what he'd been told this would look like and what it actually looked like. 2 o'clock, Arthur said. He turned the shower back to the correct temperature. The library. Reaper left. Arthur stood under the water and let the performance end. He put his left hand against the shower wall. His shoulder, the one the larger man had driven into the tile in the stumble, was sending up a clear signal, not sharp. Dull and deep, the kind that built rather than peaked. He pressed his fingers carefully into the muscle around the joint. Assessed. Not serious. He knew what serious felt like in his body with the intimacy of someone who had been cataloging it for 5 decades. This was not that. But it was something. He stood there and let himself feel it honestly. No performance, no management. Just the information received clearly. 72 years old. The body had a ledger. Every encounter made an entry. The ledger had been patient for a long time. But patience was not the same as infinite. He understood the mathematics of what he was doing here. And the mathematics required him to be honest about the resource he was drawing from. He breathed, counted, released. Then he finished his shower, dressed, and went to find Caden for their morning session. Because the morning session mattered. And because the things that mattered did not reschedule themselves around the things that hurt. Caden was at the corner table in the common room, eyes closed, hands on knees. The breathing exercise Arthur had shown him 3 days ago. The one that started with finding the breath before trying to direct it, which most people found unexpectedly difficult because they had been breathing wrong for so long that wrong felt natural. Left shoulder, Arthur said, sitting across from him. Caden opened one eye. Good morning to you as well. Your left shoulder is dropping on the exhale. Pull it back. Caden adjusted. Arthur watched the correction take, nodded once. People are talking, Caden said. Eyes closed again. About the shower room. About you, generally. The careful lightness of someone approaching a subject from an indirect angle. Word moves fast in here, I think, because there's nothing competing with it. No phones, no news, no outside noise. Information fills the whole available space. He exhaled, checked his shoulder. They're saying Reaper went in with 2 people and came out alone. Reaper came out. His people didn't walk out the same way they walked in. They walked out. They were inconvenienced. Arthur looked at his own hands. The knuckle on his right middle finger was slightly swollen. He had not noticed it in the shower. People have a tendency to add drama to things they didn't witness. Caden opened both eyes. The careful lightness was gone. How long can you keep doing this? Arthur looked at him. Not to be disrespectful, Caden said. I'm asking honestly. I've been watching you for a week and I'm doing the arithmetic and the arithmetic doesn't. He stopped. I don't know how to finish that sentence without being rude. The arithmetic doesn't favor me, Arthur said. That's what you're not saying. Yeah, you're right. Arthur turned his hand over, looked at the knuckle. The arithmetic doesn't favor me. I'm 72 years old. Victor has more people and more time and more resources and the home advantage in every possible sense. He set his hand down. But arithmetic isn't the only kind of math that applies here. Caden waited. Victor's system runs on predictability, Arthur said. On people responding to pressure the way pressure is designed to make them respond. Fear produces predictable behavior. Desperation produces predictable behavior. The moment you become unpredictable to a system built on prediction, he left it there. Caden sat with it. Then I'm scared for you, not? I know that's not the useful thing to say, but I am. Arthur looked at him, genuinely looked, at the 24-year-old across from him who had 61 days left, and a future he hadn't figured out the shape of, who had no reason to feel anything on behalf of an old man he'd known for a week except that he did. Hold on to that, Arthur said. The fear? The fact of it, that you felt it and said it. He picked up the book he'd set on the table. Most people who've been in this building long enough stop generating that kind of feeling for other people. It costs too much in a place where everything is already expensive. You haven't been here long enough to lose it. Don't let it happen. He walked toward the corridor. Caden watched him go and felt the specific warmth of someone who had been told, without sentimentality, that something about them was worth preserving. He straightened his left shoulder, breathed. Victor came at 2:15, not 2 o'clock. The 15 minutes was a statement. I come when I choose to come, not when I'm expected. A small recalibration of who was setting the terms of the interaction. Arthur was at his corner table when Victor arrived. He noted the time, said nothing about it. Victor sat across from him without being invited. No crew, no Reaper. Just Victor, alone. In the way that genuinely powerful men sometimes arrived places without their apparatus, to demonstrate that the apparatus was optional. Mrs. Calloway was behind her desk. She did not look up, but she did not leave either, and the cataloging work she was doing had slowed to a pace that was less about cataloging and more about remaining present. Neither man acknowledged this. Two of my people are in medical, Victor said. They'll be functional by tomorrow. The point isn't their functionality. I know what the point is. Arthur closed his book, set it flat on the table. You needed to say something about it. How you have. Victor looked at him. The examination he gave Arthur now was different from the cafeteria. That had been rapid assessment, the quick read of a man who processed people fast. This was the longer study, the kind that required stillness and time, and the willingness to revise what you thought you already knew. Who were you, Victor said. Before, a teacher. Of what? Discipline. The difference between strength and force. Arthur looked at him steadily. They're not the same. Most people who rely on force never learn that. It becomes a liability at the exact moment they can least afford one. Something shifted in Victor's expression. Barely. You've been watching us, Victor said. Since I arrived, what have you seen? Arthur looked at the man across from him. The 44-year-old, who had built something that had lasted 18 years in one of the most volatile environments available, who had maintained it not through brute application of violence, but through information and relationships, and the precise calibration of when to be seen and when to be invisible. A man who built something durable, Arthur said, and who has now been inside that thing for long enough that he's stopped being able to see it from outside. He said it without judgment, a clinical assessment, the tone of someone describing a condition rather than assigning blame for it. The structure became the point. You've been maintaining it so long, you've forgotten what it was supposed to serve. Victor was very still. And what was it supposed to serve? I don't know. Only you know that. Arthur opened his book again. I'd guess you did once. Silence. This isn't going to stop, Victor said. I know. Whatever you think you're doing here. I know what I'm doing here. Arthur turned a page. Not performing reading. Ending the conversation at a point of his choosing. It doesn't require your cooperation. Victor sat for another moment, then stood, adjusted his shirt with the habit of a man for whom appearance was part of the architecture of authority, walked to the door. Stop, you have a son, Victor said without turning around. Arthur's hand on the page did not move. Marcus Dean, Block B, 4 years in. Victor's voice was neutral, informational, the tone of a man presenting a fact rather than a threat, because facts were more durable than threats. And Victor dealt in durable things. Interesting that you ended up here. Saying some facility. Arthur sat. His hand was still on the page. He breathed in, slowly, counted, breathed out. Victor knowing about Marcus was not a surprise. Victor made it his business to know everything about everyone. The question was not whether he knew. The question was what he intended to do with it, and when, and in what order. Arthur turned the page and began constructing his response to a situation that had just become more complex. Behind her desk, Mrs. Holloway waited until Victor's footsteps had fully receded down the stairwell. Then she walked to Arthur's table, without books this time, just herself. That was a threat, she said quietly. It was information delivered in a way designed to produce the effect of a threat, Arthur said. There's a distinction. The distinction doesn't seem very comforting. No, he looked up at her. He knows about my son. She sat down. Because the situation warranted sitting down more than it warranted maintaining professional distance. I know about your son, too. I looked you up after the first day. Arthur looked at her. When you came in and went directly to Marcus Aurelius without browsing, she said. It seemed worth knowing who you were. She set her hands flat on the table. Marcus Dean, Block B. 4 years served of 6. She paused. He's the reason you're here, not a question, yes, Arthur said. She was quiet for a moment. My husband believed, she said slowly, that people ended up where they ended up for reasons that made sense if you knew enough of the context. I'd never assumed the obvious explanation was the complete one. She looked at the table. He was right about that. Consistently right. It was one of the things that made him good at his job, and also the thing that... She stopped. That made him trust someone he shouldn't have, Arthur said. Eventually, yes. She looked up. What are you trying to do here? Not the official version, the real one. Arthur considered her for a long moment. The woman who had been in this building for 21 years, looking for an answer she hadn't found yet. Victor has been running Block D for 18 years, he said. Administration knows us. Captain Torres knows. The system knows. Nobody has moved against it because systems this durable develop institutional accommodation. They become useful in certain ways, which makes the people who could disrupt them reluctant to pay the cost. He looked at the table. I've been watching since I arrived, writing down what I see. I have 12 days of observations. Who does what for whom? Which guards are on which arrangements? There was an incident 6 years ago, an inmate named Terrell, who was talking to an outside lawyer about conditions here. He had an accident in the workshop shortly after. He paused. I believe Marcus witnessed the order being given. Mrs. Calloway was very still. If that's true, she said carefully, then Marcus has been a liability for 4 years. Someone who knows something that Victor can't afford to have testified to. Arthur looked at her. I need to understand what Marcus knows before I know how to use it. And I need someone who has access to Captain Torres. Someone whose word would carry the kind of weight that causes him to act, rather than file and forget. She looked at him for a long time. You came in here with a plan, she said. I came in here with a framework. Plans require information. I've been gathering it. And you need me. I need someone who has been here long enough to know the difference between Torres performing concern and Torres actually moving. He met her gaze. I think you're that person. Mrs. Calloway sat at the corner table in her under-resourced library for a long moment, with the donated books around her, and the 40 minutes of good light that had come and gone hours ago, and the 21 years of a question she had not been able to answer. Show me what you've written, she said. Arthur opened the inside cover of the legal pad he'd been keeping beneath his mattress and carrying to the library in a way that looked like casual book selection. He turned it to face her. She read. She read for 11 minutes without speaking. Then she looked up. Raymond would have done the same thing you're doing, she said. Walked into the hardest available place, because that was where the work was. She looked back at the pages. He would have been terrified and done it anyway, and never let anyone see the terrified part. Sounds like a good man, Arthur said. It was a very good man. She turned a page. Captain Torres keeps a particular schedule on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. He walks the administrative corridor alone between 6:15 and 6:45. No escort. His own choice. He doesn't like the performance of it. She looked up. That's the window where a conversation could happen that wouldn't be on any log. Arthur nodded. Next Thursday, she said. Next Thursday, he agreed. The workshop was the wrong place to be at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday. Arthur knew this before he went in. He went in anyway, because avoiding it would have meant Victor knowing he was being avoided, and Victor knowing that would have accelerated whatever timeline was in motion. Better to control the terrain than to cede it. The man waiting inside was not Reaper. He was larger than Reaper, larger than the men from the shower room. The specific mass of a former professional, not the bulk of someone who'd built their body in here, but the original architecture of a man who had been trained over a long time with a specific purpose. He stood near the equipment wall with his weight already distributed correctly. His eyes tracked Arthur's entry with trained attention. 2 others near the door, standard positioning for controlling an exit. I heard you talk to Victor, the large man said. He had a low voice, the voice of someone for whom volume was a choice rather than a default, in the library. We had a conversation, Arthur said. He assessed the space, the equipment along the walls, the distance to each of the 3 men, the location of the door, and whether the 2 near it were primary or support. He wants you to understand something more clearly. His communication has been fairly clear, apparently not clear enough. The large man moved forward, not rushing. The measured advance of someone who knew what they were doing and didn't need theatrics around it. My name's Knox. Arthur, I know who you are. Then you know, Arthur said, that this is going to cost more than you're being paid for. Knox almost smiled. I'm not being paid, I'm being owed less. He stopped about 6 feet out. Victor's clearing a debt. You're the currency. Arthur exhaled and moved, not away, toward, because Knox would be expecting retreat or because the geometry of the room required that he not allow himself to be bracketed between Knox and the 2 at the door. Knox reacted faster than the men from the shower room. He was already adjusting when Arthur moved, already bringing his guard up with the instinct of someone who had spent serious time in structured combat. He caught Arthur's first strike on his forearm rather than his body. The deflection was competent. He was genuinely trained. This was different. They exchanged 3 rapid sequences that Arthur would not have been able to choreograph in advance. These were the situations where 53 years of practice either lived in the body, or it didn't, because there was no time for the conscious mind to participate. Arthur's shoulder from the shower room announced itself on the second sequence. He felt it like a word spoken in a language he understood too well. One of the men from the door moved in. Arthur pivoted, used Knox's momentum from a blocked strike to create space. His elbow connected with the incoming man's jaw. Not clean, the angle was wrong, but enough. The man's knees buckled. Knox grabbed him from behind. A full bear hug, arms around Arthur's chest, pinning both arms, lifting him partially off the floor. The compression on his ribs was immediate and significant. His vision hazed at the edges, not dramatically, the way people described things hazing in stories, but the actual physiological effect of pressure on the chest impeding the breath. He had 4 seconds before this became a problem he can solve. 3, he stopped fighting the grip, completely. Let his entire body go passive. Knox, by reflex, adjusted his hold to compensate for the change in resistance, which moved his arms 2 centimeters, which was enough. Arthur drove both thumbs into the nerve clusters at the inner aspect of Knox's forearms, the specific pressure points that disrupted grip strength by interfering with the neural signals to the hands. He had practiced this on human arms for decades. He knew the location with a precision that had nothing to do with thought. Knox's grip loosened. Arthur dropped. His feet hit the floor and he was already moving, low, under Knox's immediate reach, sweeping the larger man's lead leg with a motion that redirected Knox's weight forward. Knox went down. He went down heavily, with the sound of a significant body meeting concrete, and the table he landed against did not survive the introduction. Arthur stood. His ribs were filing a detailed complaint. His shoulder had not improved its opinion. His right knee, which had never fully forgiven him for a fall in 1987, was reminding him of this. He breathed. The remaining man from the door had stopped moving. He was looking at Knox on the floor and at Arthur standing and doing the mathematics of the situation. "Go," Arthur said. The man went. Arthur sat down, on the floor, because the floor was where he was, and his legs had expressed a preference for not continuing immediately. He sat with his back against the equipment wall, and his hands on his knees, and let his body do what it needed to do, which was shake slightly, which was a physiological response to adrenaline, and he allowed it, because there was no performance required right now. Knox was conscious, breathing, not currently interested in additional conversation. Arthur looked at his hands. The shake was subsiding. He thought about the bear hug, about the 4 seconds, about how at 40 he would have had 6, at 55, at 72, 4. The mathematics of the body were precise and patient and indifferent to what you needed them to be. He had gotten through it, this time. He needed to move faster on the documentation. He got up, straightened his shirt, walked out of the workshop, and down the corridor to the medical station where he told the nurse he had been in a fall and would like an assessment. The nurse, who had worked at Irongate for 9 years and had developed her own philosophical relationship with the gap between what people said and what had happened to them, assessed him efficiently. 2 bruised ribs, no fracture, rest and anti-inflammatories, which she provided. He thanked her, walked back to his cell, sat down, continued writing. That evening, Caden came back from his kitchen assignment and stopped in the doorway. Arthur was at the desk. Legal pad, pencil. The same focused quiet of a man for whom the writing was the main event and everything else had been the preparation for it. Caden looked at the way Arthur was sitting, the slight forward angle, the careful way he'd positioned himself on the chair. The compensation that someone unfamiliar with bodies might not catch, but that Caden, who had been to watching Arthur sit for 2 weeks, caught immediately. What happened? Workshop. Victor's? A man named Knox, from elsewhere in the facility. Caden set his things down, carefully, with the specific care of someone channeling something through their hands because they had nowhere else to put it. "Are you?" 2 ribs. Bruised. I've seen the nurse, but... He looked at Arthur's face, at the expression that was doing what it always did, which was precisely nothing dramatic. "You're sitting there writing. The writing doesn't stop because of the ribs. How?" Caden sat on his bunk. "I genuinely don't understand how you do that. I'll just absorb something and keep going." Arthur turned a page. "You breathe. You feel what you feel. You decide what it means. He wrote another line. The alternative is letting the event define the size of everything that comes after it. I'm not willing to do that. Caden was quiet for a long time. Then I have 54 days. Arthur looked up. I've been counting since day one, Caden said. 90 when I came in, I'm down to 54. And I used to think about that number all the time, the going down, the days disappearing. I thought it would feel better as it got smaller. He looked at his hands. But lately I keep thinking about what happens when it reaches 0 and I'm just. He gestured vaguely at the concept of the outside. Out there. And I don't know what I'm going to do. Arthur set the pencil down. Tell me what you're afraid of. Specifically. Caden thought about it. Seriously, the way Arthur had shown him to think about things, going to the actual shape of it, rather than the first available word for it. That I'll come out of here and everything will look the same as before and I'll just. He stopped. Become what I was. 'Cause it was easier than figuring out what else I could be. Arthur looked at him. That's a real fear, he said. It's worth respecting. It's telling you something true about the size of the work ahead of you. He picked the pencil back up. The answer isn't to not be afraid of it. The answer is to have something specific to move toward. So the fear is pushing against something real, rather than just filling the available space. Like what? I don't know. That's your question. But you have 54 days to start answering it. He wrote another line. What did you want to be before? Caden blinked. The question landed differently than he expected. What did I? I don't know. I was 23. I hadn't really. What did you want? A long pause. I wanted to build things, Caden said. Quietly, like something he'd never said out loud, like construction, not the grunt work, the design part, figuring out how a structure goes together so it holds. Arthur looked at him. Then find out what it takes to learn that, Arthur said. Not when you get out. You have a library upstairs with technical manuals and architecture books, and a librarian who will get you what you ask for, if you ask respectfully. He returned to his writing. Start now. The 54 days are time, not just countdown. Caden sat with that. Then lay back, looking at the ceiling, but differently than he usually looked at it, with the ceiling being something he was looking at while thinking about something else, rather than the thing itself. Arthur, he said after a while. Yes, thank you. Arthur wrote another line. Go find the architecture books tomorrow. Okay. Good night, Caden. Good night. The lights went to their dim overnight setting. The corridor settled into its nighttime sounds. Arthur wrote until 10 minutes after lights out, when the corridor officer made his round and he put the legal pad away and lay back and did what he did every night. He thought about Denise. Not the grief of it, not the loss in the abstract, the specific concrete details of her. The sound of her voice when she was thinking, a particular silence that had its own texture, distinct from the silence of not thinking. The way she made coffee in the morning, the whole ritual of it, the specific order of steps she never varied. The way she had looked at him across the kitchen table when he told her he was coming here. Not crying, because she only cried at specific things, usually things she considered beautiful, not things she considered hard, but with an expression that contained everything she could not say within the practical limits of language. He had memorized her face across 41 years of marriage. It was still perfectly detailed. He could close his eyes and access every part of it with complete accuracy. He did not know if this would last, but it was there now, and he kept it available, the way he kept everything that mattered available, through deliberate attention, through refusing to let the everyday erosion of time take things from him that he had decided to keep. She would have known what to do with Marcus. She always knew what to do with Marcus, because she understood him in the way that was separate from trying. In the way you understood someone when you had known them, since before they had language. Arthur was learning Marcus now, at 72. The way you learn something late, with the specific urgency of someone who understood that late was the only timeline available and moved accordingly. He breathed in, held it. He had been at Iron Gate for 14 days. In 3 days, Mrs. Calloway would speak to Torres in the administrative corridor between 6:15 and 6:45. A lot would depend on what Torres did with what she said. Arthur breathed out. And the next morning he met Marcus in the common area during the open hour, and Marcus told him what he had been carrying for 4 years. They sat across from each other at a table in the corner. The supervised common area. Guard station visible but not close. Other inmates at other tables. Their conversation sufficient cover for two people talking quietly. Marcus looked at the table between them, then at Arthur. "I need to tell you something," Marcus said. "I've needed to for a long time, but I didn't. I couldn't tell anyone in here because everyone in here is connected to Victor in some way. And I couldn't tell anyone outside because—" He stopped. "Because I was afraid of what happened to the people who talked." Arthur waited. 4 years ago, Marcus said. 3 months into my sentence, there was an inmate in Block B named Terrell Washington. He was working with a lawyer on the outside, civil rights attorney, building a case about conditions and guard misconduct. Legitimate case. Real lawyer. He had documentation. Marcus kept his voice at a steady murmur, controlled. The flatness doing something different now, not protecting himself from feeling, but protecting this information. Victor found out. Reaper came to Terrell's cell one evening. I was in the corridor. I heard Victor give the instruction. Clear. No ambiguity. He looked up. 2 days later, Terrell had an accident in the workshop. Broken spine. He was transferred to a medical facility. He's been there since. Not dead. But he stopped. To testify, not able to do anything. Arthur was still. And you saw, Arthur said, I heard. Victor giving the instruction to Reaper. Specific, by name. And Victor knows you heard. Reaper saw me in the corridor after. He didn't say anything, but he saw me. Marcus looked at the table. A week later, Victor had a conversation with me, friendly, offering me protection in exchange for certain things. Small things at first. Running messages, being available. His jaw tightened. I understood what he was doing. He was tying me to him, making me complicit in things, so that I couldn't talk about other things without implicating myself. He looked up. I've been running his communications between blocks for 3 years. Because the alternative was Terrell's alternative, Arthur said. Yes. Arthur looked at his son, at the 4 years visible on his face. Not the years themselves, the weight of carrying something alone for 4 years, in a place where there was no one safe to put it down with. You've been doing this to protect yourself, Arthur said. Not a judgment, a confirmation. And because I couldn't see a way out that didn't end. Marcus stopped. Badly. Arthur leaned forward slightly. Does Victor know about your mother? Marcus looked at him. What? The letters that stopped. The death notification that didn't arrive. Arthur kept his voice completely even. I've been asking myself for 18 months a notification fails to reach its destination in a system with documented processing procedures. Marcus stared at him and understood. The fellow's face changed, not dramatically. Something underneath shifted. He controlled what reached me, Marcus said. Very quietly. I believe so. The letters stopped when you became valuable to him. A man receiving regular letters from his mother has a connection to the outside. Has someone asking questions. Someone who might be looking at things. Arthur looked at his son. Victor removes variables. It's how he's lasted 18 years. Marcus put both hands flat on the table. He sat there for a long moment with something moving through him that was too large and too various to have a single name. Grief and rage and 4 years of assumption being dismantled, and underneath all of it, something colder and more clarifying. What do you need from me? He said. Arthur looked at him. I need you to be willing to give a formal statement to Captain Torres about what you witnessed 4 years ago, he said. About Terrell, about the instruction you heard, all of it. He paused. I need you to understand what that might mean for your safety in here before Torres can act. And I need you to decide if you're willing anyway. Marcus was quiet for a long time. The common area existed around them. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary afternoon. You have documentation, Marcus said. Beyond what I witnessed. 22 pages. 14 days of observation. Arrangements, names, dates, guard involvement. Arthur looked at his son steadily. Your testimony about Terrell is the piece that turns a conduct investigation into a criminal matter. It's the piece that makes Torres not just able to act, but obligated to. Marcus looked at the table, then up at his father. You walked in here, Marcus said slowly, to a maximum security facility, on purpose, with a plan to bring down an 18-year criminal network from the inside. He paused. By getting yourself placed in the block that man controls. Yes, that's insane. It was the option available. Marcus stared at him. You are, he said, with something in his voice that was not quite any one thing. Not anger, not admiration, not exasperation, but some compound of all three that did not have a clean word. The most infuriating man I have ever known. Your mother said that, Arthur said. Regularly. She was right. Usually. Something happened in Marcus's face then. The compound thing resolving into something simpler and older. The expression of someone finding a door they thought had been locked for years standing slightly open. I'll give the statement, Marcus said. Arthur nodded. All of it, Marcus said. Everything I know. I know, Arthur said. They sat for another moment. She would have figured this out before you did, Marcus said. His mother. Without using her name. A whole plan. She would have seen it. She would have seen it and improved it, Arthur said. She was better at strategy. I was always better at execution. That tracks, Marcus said. And for the first time in 4 years, at a table in the supervised common area of Block B's open hour, Marcus Dean smiled. Not widely. Not with the ease of someone who hadn't been careful for a long time. But the smile was real. And Arthur registered it the way he registered things that mattered. Completely. And with gratitude. And with the intention of keeping it. The night before day 19, Arthur gave Mrs. Calloway 2 things. The first was the completed legal pad. 22 pages of small, precise handwriting. Every observation from every day since he arrived. Arrangements, names, dates, amounts, the specific patterns of who moved where and when and why. The guard named Doyle, and his Tuesday evening conversations with Reaper in the maintenance corridor. The commissary irregularities that pointed to a financial network extending well beyond Block D. The workshop incident 4 years ago, cross-referenced with transfer records and medical facility documentation. Mrs. Calloway had quietly accessed through administrative channels she had earned over 21 years. On Marcus's account, written in Arthur's hand from the conversation in the common area, exact words, exact sequence, the instruction Victor had given. The name Terrell Washington, the date. The second thing was a letter, folded once. His name on the front in the same small handwriting. If I don't come to the library tomorrow, Arthur said, give both of these to Torres. Together. Don't separate them. Mrs. Calloway held the documents and the letter. She did not ask what was in the letter. She understood from 21 years of working in a building where certain conversations happened in a particular register that some things were better received as instructions than as discussions. Torres confirmed Thursday's conversation went where it needed to go, she said. He's been pulling administrative records for 6 days. Moving carefully, but he's moving. How carefully? Carefully enough that Victor doesn't know yet. Not carefully enough that it won't be visible to Victor's people in the next 48 hours. She looked at the documents in her hands. Victor is going to know something is in motion before Torres is in a position to act. I know, which means tomorrow is when Victor moves, Arthur said. Before Torres can. She stood in the diminishing evening light of the library. The 40 minutes of good morning light had been gone for hours. What remained was the fluorescent overhead, which did what fluorescent always did. Made everything look slightly more institutional than it actually was. Arthur, she said. He was already moving toward the door. Yes, Raymond used to say. She stopped, started again. He used to say that the hardest part of the work wasn't the danger. It was doing the right thing in a situation where doing the right thing was not going to protect you from the consequences of having done it. Arthur turned to look at her. He sounds, Arthur said, like someone who understood exactly what he was signing up for. He did, she said. It didn't make the consequences smaller. Arthur agreed. It just made them worth it. He left. She stood holding the documents and the letter until the overnight officer knocked on the library door to tell her it was past hours. She tucked them inside her cardigan, against her chest, and walked to her car in the dark parking lot, in the November cold, with the weight of them against her ribs the whole way home. That night Arthur did not write. He had nothing left to write. Everything that could be documented had been documented. Everything that could be prepared had been prepared. He lay on his bunk. He thought about the Baltimore alley, 19 years old, the ground cold. The moment after the 3 men walked away and the silence came down, and he was alone with the question of what he was going to do with the rest of his life. He had chosen that night to become someone who was never helpless again. He was choosing it again now, the same choice. 53 years later, different walls. He breathed in, held it, let it go. Below him, Caden was awake, Arthur could tell by the quality of the silence, the specific wakefulness of someone lying still while their mind moved. Caden, Arthur said. Yeah, go to sleep. I'm trying. Stop trying, just breathe. Pause. You scared? Asked into the dark. Arthur looked at the ceiling. I'm prepared, he said. That's what I have instead of scared right now. Is that better? It's more useful. He closed his eyes. Breathe. The sound of Caden breathing, slowly, finding the rhythm. Then, very quietly, I started the architecture books. Good. There's one about load-bearing structures. How you calculate what a frame can hold. It's actually a pause. It's really interesting. Most things are, Arthur said. When you look at them closely enough. Silence. The corridor sounds. The building settling into its nighttime register. Arthur. Yes, whatever happens tomorrow. Caden's voice was very quiet. Not dramatic. Just true. I'm glad you were here. Arthur lay in the dark. So am I, he said, and meant it in more ways than Caden knew. The morning of day 19 had a quality Arthur had felt before. Not often. Twice, maybe 3 times in 53 years. The atmospheric pressure of a day that had already decided what it was going to be. Quiet. The way serious things were often quiet. He rose before the wake-up call, dressed, made his bed, corners precise, blanket pulled to its exact line, because he was not going to stop being himself because of what the day contained. Caden was already gone to kitchen rotation. They had not said goodbye that morning. The night before had been enough. Arthur walked to the cafeteria. The corridor was wrong. Subtly. The handful of inmates who were always up before the official wake-up were absent, which meant they'd been told to stay in, or they'd heard enough to know. He kept his pace even. Got his tray. Gerald the server looked at him with something that was not quite eye contact, the expression of someone who knew what was coming and had decided the safest response was to become temporarily invisible. Arthur took his tray, found the center table, sat down, drank his coffee. It was bad. It was always bad. He had made peace with it on day 2. At 7:14, the side entrance opened. Victor came in alone, dressed with his usual precision, walking to the center of the cafeteria with 18 years of certainty in every step. He stopped 10 feet from Arthur's table, looked at Arthur. Arthur set his coffee cup down, then the doors, all of them. Men stood from tables throughout the cafeteria, not rushing. 26 of them, positioned and ready, rising with the coordinated calm of people executing a plan they had been briefed on carefully. Arthur stood up, pushed his tray aside, set his coffee cup down with care, and moved. What happened in the next 5 minutes was not choreographed. Nothing in Arthur's body had ever been choreographed. Choreography was for performance, and he had never been interested in performance. What his body did was respond. 53 years of response, built into muscle and bone and neural pathways, worn deep by repetition until they were faster than thought. The first man from his right. Arthur stepped into him rather than away. Wrong direction. Always the wrong direction for someone expecting avoidance, and the close proximity neutralized the swing. His palm found the pressure point below the man's collarbone. The man's legs made an independent decision. 2 from the left. I used the falling man's body as a 3-second barrier and took the 2 in sequence, targeting balance rather than injury, because a man without his balance was already finished. His shoulder from the workshop announced itself on the second sequence. He absorbed the information, kept moving. 3 more. Then 4. His knee submitted its grievance when he pivoted on a bad angle. He accommodated it and kept moving, because accommodating things and stopping were not the same. He used the geometry of the room, never fully surrounded, always moving to positions where the number of people who could access him simultaneously was 2 or fewer, using the men on the floor as obstacles that slowed the ones still standing. Was not elegant. It was hard, grinding, costly work. A 72-year-old man with bruised ribs and a compromised shoulder, doing the thing 53 years had built him to do, feeling every one of those years in every movement. He was slowing. Victor had not moved from near the side entrance, watching, processing. Then he reached into his shirt. The blade was small, practical, not theatrical. Victor was not a theatrical man. He moved forward, and from the far side of the cafeteria, through the main door that Torres had quietly ensured remained accessible as part of 6 days of preparation, Marcus Dean walked in, not running, walking, the same long-bone stride as his father, through the cafeteria past the men on the floor, to the center of the room. He stood next to his father, Victor stopped, looked at Marcus, then at Arthur. The expression of a man whose model of the situation has just encountered a variable it did not contain. Walk away, Victor said. Quiet, almost reasonable. This is not your situation. Marcus said nothing for a moment. My father is standing there, he said. Just that. My father is standing there and you have a blade out, so I'm standing here. Victor's jaw tightened. Your arrangement, your protection. Everything I understand what it means. The cafeteria held its breath. 26 men in various states of vertical. Guards at the periphery arrived and stopped, processing a scene that fit no protocol. Ordinary morning light through narrow windows, indifferent to everything beneath it. Victor looked at Marcus standing next to his father with nothing. No plan, no protection, no tactical advantage. Just presence. His entire system had been built on the premise that self-interest was the only durable motivator. He had no mechanism for this. He hesitated. Arthur moved. His body did not ask permission. One strike, targeting the nerve cluster as at Victor's wrist, with the accuracy of a man who had found that point 10,000 times. The blade dropped. Victor's grip failed before the conscious decision to release. His legs buckled. He went to his knees. The cafeteria was still, complete, genuine. The stillness that followed something everyone present understood was the end of an era. Victor on his knees. Arthur, standing, barely, but standing, Marcus next to him. Then the doors opened with the sound of official entry, and Captain Torres came through with 8 officers, and the specific energy of a man who had been preparing for 6 days and was not going to let the weight of the moment make him sloppy. Torres crossed the cafeteria without hurrying. He knelt beside Victor, applied cuffs efficiently, stood. Doyle is in administrative custody, Torres said to Arthur. Since 6:15 this morning. I coordinated with Mrs. Calloway last night on timing. He looked at the documents in his hand, what she had delivered, annotated with 6 days of his own findings. The financial records are enough to prosecute. Washington's case is being referred to the state attorney today. Arthur nodded. Medical for you, Torres said. Not a question. Yes, Torres looked at Marcus' formal statements, multiple sessions. I can't make it comfortable. I can make it structured. Tell me when and where, Marcus said. Torres nodded with the weight of someone who understood what had just been offered and wasn't going to minimize it with a speech. Then he went to work. The nurse in medical assessed Arthur without editorial. Hairline fracture in one rib. The shoulder needed imaging. The knee required rest. The knuckle on his right hand, swollen since the workshop and ignored through subsequent events, was finally receiving attention. How long before the ribs are functional, Arthur said. 6 weeks minimum before anything physical. I have a follow-up question about anything physical. The answer, she said, without looking up, is yes, that includes whatever you're already planning. He thanked her. 3 days later, Caden appeared in Arthur's temporary quarters with the expression of someone who had heard everything from 6 different sources. They're saying, probably accurate, the part where Marcus just walked in. Yes. Caden sat down. He didn't have to do that. No, he knew what it would cost. Yes. Caden sat with it, with the weight of witnessing something that didn't fit the categories he'd been using to understand the world. Okay, he said. Then I finished the load-bearing structures book. There's a second one on cantilever design. I've been doing the calculations in the margins. He glanced up. I think I might actually be good at this. You are, Arthur said. Caden blinked. You don't know that. I know how you approach problems. I know what it looks like when someone has found the thing that fits them. Arthur looked at him steadily. Do the work and find out how good. Caden looked at the floor. 39 days. I know. I'm not only scared anymore about what happens when it reaches 0. Something in his face settled. I think I might actually be ready. Arthur said nothing, because nothing needed to be added to that. The review board's determination came through on a Tuesday. Torres appeared at 9 a.m. with the document and the expression of a man genuinely glad to deliver news. Time served with full credit, Torres said. Formal discharge in 48 hours. He paused to Marcus's case goes to the review panel next week. The panel has everything. My testimony, the documentation, his statement, the Washington referral. The case for reduction is real. I know, Arthur said. He knows, Torres looked at him. When you walked into that cafeteria on day 19, were you certain it would work? Arthur thought about the honest answer. I was certain about the documentation. Certain about you. I looked at the corridor wall. Whether I stayed on my feet long enough for it to matter. No. I was not certain about that. But you went anyway. The documentation didn't deliver itself. Torres almost smiled. Almost. Then walked away. On the last evening, Arthur found Mrs. Calloway not pretending to catalog. She was at the reference table with a proposal document she'd been building for 2 weeks. She pushed it toward him. He read it. Breathing techniques, conflict de-escalation, 12-week curriculum, provision for outside educators on a structured basis. TARS is supporting it, she said. Administration will approve. They will. I need someone to help design the practical components. She looked at him. Monthly visits, sometimes more. There are programs that allow outside educators on a structured basis. Arthur looked at the proposal. At the document, this woman had built using 21 years of knowledge about this building and the people in it. I'd need to coordinate with Cedric. The dojo has a schedule. Of course. He looked up. I'm willing. She nodded, composed. 21 years of composure holding, as always, almost perfectly. Raymond would have been glad, she said quietly, to know this was real, that the thing he believed in was real. It was always real, Arthur said. The cost of something doesn't determine whether it's true. She was quiet. Then, I've spent 21 years looking for evidence that his faith was justified. She looked at the table. I think I found it. Arthur said nothing, because some things were better received in silence. He stood, picked up Meditations, set it on the return shelf. Leave it out, Mrs. Calloway said, for the program. Left it out, and walked out of the library for the last time. Discharge took 2 hours. Paperwork. The exchange of orange for his own clothes, which felt like wearing someone else's life. Torres was in the corridor near the discharge office. Off to the side. Not official. Don't let the system reabsorb what happened here, Arthur said. I won't, Torres said. The gate opened. The air outside was cold and gray and smelled of the parking lot and the distant highway and nothing remarkable. It was the best thing Arthur had smelled in 50 days. Marcus was 20 feet from the gate, released 11 days earlier. The panel had moved with the speed Torres had made possible. Expedited review under extraordinary circumstances. Sentence reduced to time served. He was standing with his hands in the pockets of a jacket, slightly too light for November, that he had chosen anyway. Because it was his jacket. Because he was choosing now. They walked toward each other, met in the middle. Arthur put his arms around his son. Not performing it, simply doing it. Marcus put his arms around his father, and they stood in the November parking lot outside Ironget. 2 men, 172, 134, the same longs, and held on longer than either had planned. When they stepped back, neither of them remarked on it. Marcus looked at his father's face. You look tired. Finish tired, Arthur said. The kind that means something is done. They drove. Marcus drove. Arthur watched the world through the window. A gas station. A diner. A woman walking an oversized dog. An ordinary Tuesday morning in November, proceeding without any awareness of the last 50 days. The world was indifferent. Arthur found this, unexpectedly, comforting. After a while, Marcus said, I called Cedric 3 days ago. He kept his eyes on the road. He's added a Tuesday evening section. Adult beginners. No prior experience required. A pause. He mentioned the original instructor might be available to take certain sessions back, if interested. Cedric has been running it well. He said so himself. Marcus changed lanes. He also said the Tuesday beginner section has a waiting list. Arthur looked at the side of his son's face, at the expression of a man trying not to care too obviously about an answer to a question he hadn't quite asked. I'll need a few weeks, Arthur said. The ribs, of course, and the knee before tour sessions, obviously. But after that, a Tuesday evening session might be manageable. Marcus exhaled. Not dramatically, just the breath of someone who'd been holding something and was putting it down. There's one other thing, Marcus said. Tell me, I put my name on the waiting list. Arthur turned to look at him. I know it's been 17 years, Marcus said. I know I'd start from the beginning. No special consideration, none. Then I want to learn it properly, the whole thing. He glanced at Arthur. What you were trying to teach me at 17. I want to actually learn it this time. Arthur looked at the road ahead. What changed, he said. Marcus was quiet for a moment. I stood in a cafeteria next to my father with nothing to offer except being there. He kept his eyes forward, and it turned out that was enough to matter. He paused. I want to understand where that comes from. I think you're the person who can teach me. Arthur looked at the passing road, the city at its edges, the route home through streets that would look the same and completely different, the way places did after an absence that contained something significant. It starts with the breath, Arthur said. Everything starts there. I remember that much. You'll think you remember more than you do. Beginners always do. He looked out the window. You're at the start. Everyone is, including you. Arthur considered this honestly. Every morning, he said. Marcus nodded, something in his face finding its way toward something more open, the last residue of 4 years of guarded surfaces, quietly resolving. He said, the word back in its natural place. Yes, I'm sorry. For the years he stopped. For the distance. I wasn't there when you needed me, Arthur said. We are both starting from the beginning. Marcus looked at the road, then at his father, and nodded. The car continued. November continued. Ordinary and indifferent, and full of everything still ahead. 6 months later, on a Tuesday evening in May, the dojo smelled like wood and sweat and something being built. 12 adults on the floor, 22 to 69 years old. A retired school teacher who had come for stress management and stayed for something she didn't have a word for yet. A 26-year-old who had been on the waiting list for 11 weeks and arrived on day 1 with the energy of someone who had decided to stop waiting for their life to change. On the third row, with the posture of someone excavating a memory, Marcus Dean, Arthur stood at the center of the mat, where he had always stood. We begin with the breath, Jess said, not because breathing is complicated, because most of us have been doing it wrong long enough that wrong feels like right. The first work is always the same, finding what's true underneath what's become habitual. He looked at the room, at 12 people who had arrived for 12 different reasons that, followed back far enough, resolved into the same one. The need to understand what they were capable of. The need to feel less helpless. The need to find out who they were when the things they used to define themselves were set aside. He had been teaching this for 53 years. He was still learning it. Close your eyes, he said. Find the breath before you try to direct it. It's already there. The room settled. 12 people breathing. Evening light through the dojo windows, long and gold the way May light was. The street outside doing its ordinary business. The specific quiet of a space where serious things happened without performance. Arthur breathed in, held it, let it go. The same choice he had made on a cold ground in Baltimore at 19. The same choice at Irongate's gate at 72. Not made once and held forever, made again every morning. By everyone, without exception, just for what was in front of you. To begin again.